Good morning, Team Alabama. Sorry about that. Our camera froze. We're on the bottom of page 491. 491. I made up the beds the way that Mr. Frank and Mr. Kraler said. She starts out, "Forgive me," and this is Meep. "I have to hurry. I've got to go to the other side of town to get some ration books for you." Ration books? If they see our names on ration books, they'll know we're here. There isn't anything. Don't worry, your names won't be on them, Meep is telling her as she hurries out. I'll be up later. Thank you, Meep. Mrs. Frank to Mr. Kraler. It's illegal, then the ration books. We've never done anything illegal. And Mrs. Frank is kind of a worrywart type. Okay, she worries about doing everything appropriate. And Anne and her mom kind of have some friction there. Anne is bold, and she is not a worrywart. Mom, Mrs. Frank, is very much a worrywart and worried about doing things very proper. And Anne is bold and loud, and she kind of thinks Mom is a wimp. Okay, so kind of be aware of that as we move forward. Mr. Frank, we won't be living here exactly according to regulations. As Mr. Kraler reassures Mrs. Frank, he takes various small things such as matches, soap, etc. from his pockets, handing them to her. This isn't the black market, Mrs. Frank. This is what we call the white market, helping all the hundreds and hundreds who are hiding out in Amsterdam. The carillon is heard playing the quarter hour before 8. Mr. Kraler looks at his watch, and Anne stops at the window as she comes down the stairs. It's the Westertoren. I must go. I must be out of here and downstairs in the office before the workmen get here. He starts for the stairs leading out. Meep or I or both of us will be up each day to bring you food and news and find out what your needs are. Tomorrow, I'll get you a better bolt for that door at the foot of the stairs. It needs a bolt that you can throw yourself and open only at our signal. To Mr. Frank, oh, you'll tell them about the noise? I'll tell them. Goodbye. And then for a moment, I'll come up again after the workmen leave. Goodbye, Mr. Kraler. How can we thank you? The others murmur their goodbye. Sorry, guys. 492. Mr. Kraler, I never thought I'd live to see the day when a man like Mr. Frank would have to go into hiding. When you think, he breaks off, going out, and Mr. Frank follows him down the steps, bolting the door after him. In the interval before he returns, Peter goes over to Margot, shaking hands with her, and as Mr. Frank comes back up the step, Mrs. Frank questions him anxiously. What did he mean about the noise? First, let us take off some of these clothes. They all start to take off the garments after garment. On each of their coats, sweaters, and blouses, suits, and dresses is another yellow Star of David. Okay, so why did they have so many clothes on? That's right. When you go into hiding, you don't take your suitcase down the middle of the road and announce to all the police, hey, we're leaving here. We're going into hiding. So they wore all their clothes into hiding, and they took them off. They took the layers of clothing off once they got there. So on each of their coats, sweaters, blouses, suits, dresses is another yellow Star of David. Mr. and Mrs. Frank are underdressed quite simply. The others wear several things: sweaters, extra dresses, bathrobes, aprons, nightgowns, etc. It's a wonder we weren't arrested walking along the streets. Petronella with a fur coat in July. Okay, so Mrs. Van Dan's first name is Petronella, and she came into hiding in the attic or the secret annex with her fur coat on. And that cat of Peter's crying all the way. Anne, as she is removing a pair of panties. A cat? Mrs. Frank is shocked because Anne's taking panties off. Anne, please. It's all right. I've got on 3 more. She pulls off 2 more. Finally, as they have all removed their surplus clothes, they look to Mr. Frank, waiting for him to speak. Now, about the noise. While the men are in the building below, we must have complete quiet. Every sound can be heard down there, not only in the workrooms, but in the offices too. The men come at about 8:30 and leave at about 5:30. So to be perfectly safe, From 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, we must move only when necessary. So they have to be quiet from 8 to 6 because there are men working downstairs. So in the attic, they're going to have to lay low during the whole day. We must move only when necessary and then in stockinged feet. Okay, so no shoes on. They can only move around in feet in like socks or stockings, which is like tights. We must not speak above a whisper. We must not run any water. Okay, so those are all really good facts. They cannot speak above a whisper, and they can't run any water during the day. We cannot use the sink or even, forgive me, the WC. And the WC is the toilet. So during the day, they can't use the toilet. The pipes go down through the workrooms, and it would be heard. No trash. Okay, so they can't do anything about trash. They are going to have to burn it. Mr. Frank stops abruptly as he hears the sound of marching feet from the street below. Everyone is motionless, paralyzed with fear. Mr. Frank goes quietly into the room on the right to look out the window, and Anne runs after him, peering out with him. The tramping feet pass without stopping, and the tension is relieved. Mr. Frank, followed by Anne, returns to the main room and resumes his instructions to the group. No trash must ever be thrown out, which might reveal that someone is living up here. Not even a potato paring, like the peel on a potato. We must burn everything in the stove at night. This is the way we must live until it is over, if we are to survive. There is silence for a second. Until it is over? Mr. Frank reassuringly. After 6, we can move about. We can talk, we can laugh, have our supper and read and play games just as we would at home. He looks at his watch. And now I think it would be wise if we all went to our rooms and we settled before 8 o'clock. Mrs. Van Daan, you and your husband will be upstairs. I regret that there's no place up there for Peter, but he will be here near us. This will be our common room where we will meet to talk and eat and read like one family. Mr. Van Daan, and where do you and Mrs. Frank sleep? This room is also our bedroom. That isn't right. We'll sleep here and you take the room upstairs. Mr. Van Daan, it's your place. Please, I've thought this out for weeks. It's the best arrangement, the only arrangement. Mrs. Van Daan to Mr. Frank, never, never can we thank you. And then to Mrs. Frank, I don't know what would have happened to us if it hadn't have been for Mr. Frank. You don't know how your husband helped me when I came to this country, knowing no one, not able to speak the language. I can never repay him for that. Okay, so Mr. Frank says that. So that's why he invited the Van Daans to come live with them, is because when they got to the country, Mr. Van Daan helped him quite a bit. I can never repay him for that. Going to Mr. Van Daan, may I help you with your things? Mr. Van Daan, no. Come along, Leafy. Okay, and so that's like his pet name that he calls his wife. And it's means little darling. Okay, so Mr. Van Daan calls Mrs. Van Daan Leafy, little darling. You all will be all right, Peter. You're not afraid. Peter, embarrassed, please, Mother. They start up the stairs to the attic room above. Mr. Frank turns to Mrs. Frank. You too must have some rest, Edith. You didn't close your eyes last night, nor you, Margot. I slept, Father. Wasn't that funny? I knew it was the last night in my own bed, and yet I slept soundly. I'm glad, Anne. Now you'll be able to help me straighten things in here. To Mrs. Frank and Margot, come with me. You and Margot rest in this room for the time being. He picks up their clothes, starting for the room on the right. You're sure? I could help, and Anne hasn't had her milk. I'll give it to her. To Anne and Peter. Anne, Peter, it's best that you take off your shoes now before you forget. He leads the way to the room, followed by Margot. So remember, they're going to have to take their shoes off during the day. They can't wear them between 8 and 6. You're sure you're not tired, Anne? I feel fine. I'm going to help, Father. Peter, I'm glad you are to be with us. Yes, Mrs. Frank. Mrs. Frank goes to join Mr. Frank and Margot. During the following scene, Mr. Frank helps Margot and Mrs. Frank to hang up their clothes. Then he persuades them both to lie down and rest. Then the Van Dans in their room above settle themselves, and in the main room, Anne and Peter remove their shoes. Peter takes his cat out of the carrier. "What's your cat's name?" Anne's asking. "Mooshy." "Mooshy. Mooshy, Mooshy, Mooshy." She picks up the cat, walking away with it, and to Peter, "I love cats. I have one, a darling little cat, but they made me leave her behind. I left some food and a note for the neighbors to take care of her. I'm going to miss her terribly. What is yours, a him or a her?" He's a Tom. He doesn't like strangers. He takes the cat from her, putting it back in its carrier. Anne, unabashed. "Then I'll have to stop being a stranger, won't I? Is he fixed?" Startled. "Huh? Did you have him fixed?" "No." "Oh, you ought to have him fixed to keep him from, fighting. Where did you go to school?" "Jewish secondary." "But that's where Margot and I go. I never saw you around." "I used to see you sometimes." "You did?" "In the schoolyard. You were always in the middle of a bunch of kids." He takes a penknife from his pocket. "Why didn't you ever come over?" "I'm sort of a lone wolf," Peter says to Anne. He starts to rip off his Star of David. "What are you doing? Taking it off?" "But you can't do that. They'll arrest you if you go out without your star." He tosses his knife on the table. "Who's going out?" "Why, of course, you're right. Of course we don't need them anymore." She picks up his knife and starts to take her star off. "I wonder what our friends will think when we don't show up today. I didn't have any dates with anyone." Okay, we're going to stop there today. Have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama. Let's go ahead and add a few facts. Can we add that Peter brought his cat Mooshy? And Anne says she loves cats. Okay, and then why don't you add 2 more that you can think of? Have a great rest of your day.